Resuming debate, the honourable member for Calgary Heritage.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to discuss the ruling of the Speaker with regard to the production of documents ordered by the House on the scandal involving Sustainable Development Technology Canada, also known as the Liberal Green Slush Fund. For those watching at home, here are the facts. The Auditor General found that the Prime Minister has turned Sustainable Development Technology Canada into a slush fund for Liberal insiders. $58 million went to 10 ineligible projects that couldn't demonstrate an environmental benefit or progress in any green technology. $58 million given to projects without any effort to ensure that the terms of the contribution agreements were even met. $334 million was funneled to 186 cases where board members held a conflict of interest. Imagine that, Mr. Speaker. The very people trusted with safeguarding taxpayer dollars were funneling money into projects they themselves were connected to. This NDP Liberal government shovels the working man's pay into the pockets of elitists who provide no value to the country. $400 million. Canadians who are barely scraping by are watching this Prime Minister waste $400 million of their hard-earned taxpayer dollars. Listen, it's a lot of money and hard to think about how big it actually is. So here's what $400 million means for Canadians. $400 million could cover the costs for, get this, about 89,000 kids to play hockey. Think about that. With rising costs, families are barely able to put food on the table, let alone pay for a season of hockey to keep their kids active. $400 million could cover a month's worth of groceries for over 300,000 families of 4. Right now, 1 in 5 kids are facing poverty. 2 million Canadians are going to food banks. $400 million could feed hundreds of thousands of them. For our seniors watching their pensions go up in smoke from this Prime Minister's carbon tax and inflationary spending, $400 million could cover a year's worth of housing for around 10,000 of them. The $400 million could have gone towards our healthcare system, where 1 in 4 Canadians are set to lose primary care within a couple of years. $400 million could hire 4,700 more nurses or 1,700 doctors to ease stress on the system. $400 million. For what? The SDTC scandal is just one example of the moral and financial corruption of NDP Liberals. A few hours from now, we were supposed to hear the fall economic statement from the now former finance minister. But she won't be delivering it because she's gone. She, like millions of Canadians, has no confidence in this Prime Minister. In her resignation today, she said the government needs to keep its fiscal powder dry and avoid costly political gimmicks. Even she admitted that this government has abandoned our people, saying Canadians know when government is focused on itself. And finally, she conceded the inevitable truth that this NDP Liberal government will come to an end. But let's not forget, this is from the same disgracefully awful finance minister who blew up the deficit, raised taxes on hardworking Canadians, and couldn't even stay within their own fiscal guardrails. Her legacy? Inflationary spending, higher taxes, and broken promises. Mr. Speaker, this NDP Liberal government is a national embarrassment, a dumpster fire. 9 years of inflationary spending, a ruthless carbon tax, broken immigration, housing doubled, crime, chaos, drugs, and disorder. And now, a fall economic statement without a finance minister to deliver it. The Prime Minister has lost the confidence of his own cabinet. The sellout NDP and their leader appear to have more confidence in these Liberals than the Liberals have in themselves. Listen, it's clear this Prime Minister has a problem with strong women. Jody Wilson-Raybould, Jane Philpott, and now another one out the door. Every Liberal member, every NDP member in this House knew all of these so-called programs were delivering nothing, and they watched every single one fail. They sat idly by as Canadians continued to struggle to put food on the table and pay their bills. How many across the way agree with the finance minister? How many are willing to let this chaotic clown show of a government continue? From evidence-based policy to macroeconomic government gimmicks, it's time for this Liberal caucus to put this government out of its misery. It's time for them to force a vote of confidence in this Prime Minister's leadership. Will these NDP Liberals have the guts to stand up and have a free vote? Or will the NDP leader get up on his feet and deliver today's fall economic statement? To quote Jody Wilson-Raybould, when the general is losing his most loyal soldiers on the eve of a war, the country desperately needs a new general. I agree. For the sake of our country, Canadians need a carbon tax election today. This is not a serious government. And the matter at hand, which we discussed today, the Green Slush Fund scandal, one of the many scandals from this government, has led us here to this very moment. A question I'm always asked from my neighbors back home is, how do we get out of this mess? How do we fix all that has been broken and get back to the country we all know and love? How can Canada go from middling power to the major power it could be? Well, for starters, we can scrap these payouts to this Prime Minister's corporate cronies for so-called sustainable development projects. We can axe the carbon tax eating away at our paychecks, our industries, and our trade, and shift our focus to the power of our resources sector. It's time for us to put Canada first above all else. Our workers, our paychecks, our people. Our resources represent trillions that would fuel, feed, and secure the world, bring home paychecks for our people, build energy projects reducing emissions, build economic reconciliation with First Nations, and rebuild our armed forces. For many, Canada's role in the world is often centered on what we can do with our intellectual and cultural talents. We see ourselves as a country best suited to act as a teacher, a mediator, or a good example. We cling to a Canadian diplomacy from an international order of a different age. But this excessive focus on Canada's social capital can distract from the fact that we actually are distinguished on one important front: energy. Canada is a world leader in its supply and mastery of virtually every energy resource and technology known to man. And with this enviable access to the assets that fuel 21st century life, increasingly reflecting real political power, Canada has the ability and the opportunity to present itself as a true leader. The sheer size of Canadian energy interests ensures virtually no corner of this planet is beyond our influence or our contribution. And should we choose to seize it, we have a unique opportunity to both supply our allies with the energy they need, while also lessening the energy influence of the world's bad actors. So as economies require more and more energy and rely more and more on supply routes from undesirable sources, the stakes and the upsides for every Canadian are high. China's energy imports have mirrored larger trends in its decisively illiberal foreign policy. Close relationships with Iran, Russia, and Venezuela have kept China awash in petroleum, while Beijing plays defense for the atrocities of Putin and Maduro regimes in international forums. In the Middle East, continued bad actions by the state of Qatar, including housing Hamas terrorists, have resulted in appropriate calls for the country's diplomatic and economic isolation. This provides ample opportunity for any nation willing to offer itself as an alternative to Qatari oil and gas, which is currently exported everywhere from Morocco to Europe to Japan. Canada already has nuclear cooperation agreements with Jordan and the UAE. These agreements should be animated with long-term Canadian supply. It is perhaps in Europe, however, where the geopolitics of energy are most fraught and most open to Canadian supply. Vladimir Putin spent years choreographing Germany's dependencies on Russian oil. Having exploited that to shake down Europe, he intervened in Syria and Libya to subvert pipelines that would supply Europe and amplified misinformation against our own Canadian energy, ensuring a steady stream of revenue for Russia's war machine of nearly $1 billion a day and $250 million a day from Germany alone to fund his war machine. When Germany finally realized the costs of this, Chancellor Scholz and subsequently Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky came knocking on our door for Canadian energy, and both times we turned them away. The leadership that Canada can demonstrate in offsetting these negative trends for energy, sustainable energy, and energy technologies is clear. We should fearlessly pursue our economic interests by making Canadian energy resources and technologies accessible to those who want them, offsiding Allied dependence on worse alternatives. But at precisely the moment the world and our people need more Canada, these NDP Liberals want to shut down our resources. With growing uncertainty about whether this country has the capacity to get its energy to overseas markets, Canada has to do better. It is insufficient to merely repudiate the anti-energy agenda. A comprehensive Canadian energy action plan is needed to advance the essential resources that support the Canadian social safety net and that can deliver Canadian leadership to a world that demands it. We must liberate Alberta's oil sands from their landlocked status to dramatically increase Canadian oil exports and, at the same time, Canadian power on the international stage. We must open liquefied natural gas export terminals on Canada's east coast, allowing it to serve as a gateway point of Canadian natural gas to Europe. And we must limit the damage of foreign interests who have worked to disrupt Canadian energy production. For too long, woke leftist policies have demanded that emerging economies extend the poverty of their people and delay the economic development rather than accelerate sustainable growth toward lessening environmental damage. Addressing energy poverty boldly, where the young can light their homes to do homework at night, where industrial development builds smarter cities faster that pollute less, where traditional energy catalyzes transformative growth, should feature centrally in our national policy. This isn't the first time that Canada's national interests have encountered obstacles, but Canada itself was forged by overcoming divisions with big vision, uniting a country with ribbons of steel and advancing a shared national purpose. For more than 150 years, our country has endured wars and depressions and hard times. Our experience as one of the oldest democracies on earth affords us the opportunity to apply the lessons of an imperfect past towards shaping a promising future. In an uncertain world, Canada's essential contributor and rise as a power hinges on our ability to reconnect with the determination and resolve that has already overcome so much and dispense with the corruption that we have seen awash in this House today and over these last years. Now is the age of leaders with the courage of their convictions, leaders with the competence to see us succeed, leaders who end the corruption awashing among NDP Liberals. Now is the time for a Prime Minister with the brains and backbone to stand up for this country, a Prime Minister that will rebuild our security, our military, and our economy. Let's have the election Canadians need. Let's restore the promise. Let's put Canada first. Thank you very much.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Putting Canada first is something in which this government has been doing since day one. As in fact, we've been building upon Canada's middle class and those aspiring to be a part of it, dealing with the many different economic challenges before us. But to highlight, when he talks about putting Canada first, this particular Prime Minister and this government has actually signed off on more trade agreements than any other Prime Minister or government before us. Foreign investment was I believe, number 3 in the world coming to Canada on a per capita basis, number 1 in terms of the G7 countries. When you take a look in terms of the issues that are related here in Canada, compare Canada's interest rates, our inflation rates to any other G7 country, and you'll find that we're doing exceptionally well. But it still doesn't, it still is important that the government continue to look at the issue of affordability as we have, being sympathetic to in terms of the needs of Canadians, and that's why we come up with issues such as the tax holiday for Canadians on the GST on a number of selected items, an issue in which the Conservatives actually campaigned on, yet that member and the Conservative caucus actually voted against that particular tax cut. Can the member explain why to his constituents, on the one hand, they talk about a tax cut, but on the other hand, when it came time to vote, they actually voted against a tax cut?
The Honourable Member for Calgary Heritage.
Well, as the Parliamentary Secretary well knows, the so-called promised tax cut of this NDP Liberal government is falling apart at the seams. This is one of the major issues that their own Finance Minister resigned her post over, because she understood that the gimmicks and the performance politics of the Prime Minister and their government was in no way a responsible decision to make. She cited in her letter exactly why this tax cut comes at an irresponsible time, in a time in which we expect to see tariffs being imposed on Canadians and on the Canadian economy, and how creating fiscal restriction and being irresponsible with the budget to the tune of billions would cost this government and the country its position to negotiate with the United States and others. Nobody believes the parliamentary secretary and his NDP Liberals when it comes to their performance over the last 9 years. The evidence is obvious in the lives of every Canadian who are hurt and broken by what has happened in the irresponsible administration of this government. We have seen decision after decision place partisanship ahead of the country, decision after decision, place their Prime Minister's personal interests over the actual people of Canada at every turn. Never have we seen this government make a decision for the interests of the country ahead of their own partisan ambitions, and today especially we see the price of that manifest in their Finance Minister's resignation.
Questions and comments? The Honourable for Barrie Innisfil.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And we are really in a unique position today as parliamentarians. We have a front row seat to what many Canadians are seeing today as a government that is spiraling out of control, that is literally collapsing before us at a very important time in our nation's history. The NDP has an opportunity here to make the right decision for once, and not support this government, not show any confidence in this government. Later today, the fall economic statement is going to be presented, we think, we're not so sure anymore, but if it is, I am sure that there are mechanisms in which the leadership side of the government, the House Leader or others, could put it to a vote quickly. We could do it tonight, we could do it tomorrow, and I think that would signal whether in fact this House, as we know there are 70% of Canadians or more who don't have confidence in this government, but I think it would show that this House has no confidence in this government, save and except the NDP. So would the honourable member agree with me that we could, if we wanted to, put the fall economic statement to a vote immediately to show whether this House has confidence in the government? I suspect that not to be the case, which would then force an election where we can return to some normalcy, some decency, and some morality in this country led by a common-sense Conservative government. Thank you.
Member for Calgary Heritage.
The honourable member from Barrie Innisfil is great, as a source of great wisdom. We need an election today. And if any of these NDP Liberal colleagues go back to their ridings and actually listen to their people, they'll hear exactly what we're hearing from not only our friends and neighbours in our ridings, but in theirs across the country. Every single member of Parliament here is hearing how badly Canadians want a carbon tax election today. And this fall economic statement does provide that opportunity. You know, I reflect on what the honourable member just said about our NDP colleagues. I mean, they must be tormented over there in that caucus.
I don't think they are.
On one side, they have a leader who is so determined to focus on their own pension that they're forfeiting the entire party and its principles for the sake of power. Power that not even the finance minister, the actual deputy prime minister of Canada, not the fake deputy prime minister that the NDP leaders, but the actual deputy prime minister of Canada resigned her cabinet post over, but the fake deputy prime minister, the NDP leader, is determined to hold on to power for. You know, they talk about democracy and freedom in NDP and Liberal ranks, but here's an opportunity for them to accomplish that. Here's an opportunity for them to have a free vote on the fall economic update and call a carbon tax election that Canadians want today. Thank you very much.
Questions et commentaires, l'honorable député.
The honourable member for Thérèse de Blainville. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We're seeing something quite unprecedented today, and I hear the other side of the House asking questions about the kind of bungled tax, sales tax, which was probably the last straw for the finance minister who's stepping down. So I'd like you to reassure Canadians, and this is my question, Canadians, you keep saying that the Canadians want a carbon tax election. I don't think you have a very good gauge of things. If Canadians want an election, it's for something better rather than just scrapping the carbon tax and thinking that's going to solve all our problems. Do you think the carbon tax, scrapping that, was going to solve every problem?
I appreciate our honourable colleague for her question and her thoughtfulness. I agree with her 1,000%. It's a bungled sales tax. It's a bungled tax on everything. It's a bungled program. The whole government's program for 9 long years has been an absolute mess. And so I agree with my honourable colleague in the assumption of her question. With respect to a carbon tax election, the carbon tax is literally a tax on everything, on gas, on home heating, on what it takes to grow the food, ship the food, sell the food. And it is a tax that immorally punishes the lowest income Canadians disproportionately. The carbon tax is a tax that has had deleterious effect on our economy and our national life. It has made us less competitive. The carbon tax is the source of why we have so much inflationary pressure on our goods and services in the marketplaces across the country today. It is a tax that is breaking people every single winter, especially at the one coming up ahead, with the promise of it quadrupling to 6.1 cents a litre. So when I hear, as the honourable member mentioned, our friends and neighbours around the country complaining about the costs of everything, the staggering debt that they have to pull themselves through just to be able to get through the next quarter. When I hear the anxiety and the desperation in the voices of our neighbours about how expensive everything is, it is the carbon tax that would lower that price and alleviate pressure on the lowest income Canadians and unleash our country's economic potential. I thank her very much for the question.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, Government House Leader.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, there was a great deal of misinformation in terms of what it is that the member just finished indicating. And let me put it to him in a different way. And I've put this challenge out before. On this particular issue, in the price of pollution, the carbon rebate versus the carbon tax, I would welcome any Conservative member of the caucus to actually come to Winnipeg North, or even have something at a local university here in Ottawa where we can actually have a debate on that issue. Is the member that confident in the Conservative notes that he has provided to be able to take me up on the challenge? Will he have a debate in public in the form of a post-secondary facility that would allow for him to express his thoughts on the price on pollution, both carbon tax versus the carbon rebate? Does he have the type of courage to take me up on that challenge?
Member for Calgary Heritage.
Well, as a parliamentary secretary may know, I spent 9 long years leading a nonpartisan think tank practice in the public debate before arriving in this chamber. I've never had a problem debating the facts of things that hurt our country's economic potential here in the chamber or anywhere in the country. I appreciate his challenge, but here's an opportunity for the parliamentary secretary. He has a chance to be a minister of the Liberal Party of Canada. He has a chance to be a minister for this Prime Minister. Here's an opportunity for him to perform as best as he can in this chamber and win the good graces of the Prime Minister in his dying days of this government and speak on behalf of the government as a member of the Cabinet. Thank you very much.